Hey, Jen. Good morning. How are you?
Hi, good, thanks. And you?
Good. Are you my presenter today?
I am.
Yeah. Okay. Good. I have it down as Jennifer, but I just want to make sure.
Yep. The only one who calls me Jennifer is my grandmother when I'm in trouble.
Okay. Understand that. Then I'm waiting for one other presenter, I believe, right?
Dave
David.
will be joining us in a minute. Mhm.
Okay. Great. Now, do you want to practice anything?
No, we should be good.
Okay. And you only have one system running, one computer or phone, no other audio going on?
Nope, just one.
Okay,
So
good.
I should be connected, and then Dave will do the sharing of the screen.
Okay.
So when he comes on, we'll probably just go through the PowerPoint to make sure. I think there's only one video that we may play as a backup, but we'll just run through that to make sure that it goes through.
Yep, awesome. And then you think you'll use the full hour or 50 minutes, I guess?
Yeah, so I know we were given an hour, but we also saw on the schedule that things are back to back.
Yeah, it looks like it's 50 minutes. It says duration 50 minutes on my run a show, but you know, I mean, I'm just going from here to the next 10 o'clock session, so I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah, so that's what we figured. We'll probably wait a few minutes to get started and then make sure that we end probably within like the 5-minute mark.
Okay.
So that, you know, people who need to transfer can transfer.
Yep. Okay, sounds good. I'll give you a 15-minute warning and a 5-minute warning and a 1-minute warning. I think you guys will be on top of it, though. I don't think it's gonna be a problem.
Okay. Yeah, we should be. I would say we do this all the time, but I feel like everybody does this all the time now.
Yeah, I know, right? And then right now it's locked. I think I locked this. I need to unlock so David can get it. You know, it's still unlocked. So once David gets in, I'll lock the meeting. You guys can practice, and then I'll unlock the meeting about like 5 till. And then
Okay.
normally everybody's starting about 1 after. So I'll play some music while we're all waiting, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
And then right about 30 seconds after the hour, you'll hear the music get a little louder, and then I'll bring it soft all the way down to a silence. And when you hear it go silent, that's when you start your session.
Okay.
Make
Sounds
sense?
good.
Okay,
Yep.
cool. Awesome. Make sure I got it all set up. Yeah, that's good. Chat. Okay. And the chat's open to public and private, so people can chat with each other privately, and they can also chat publicly. So just so you know.
Okay. Yeah, I think we are using the chat at certain points today for things, but
Okay, good.
that was about it.
And no breakout room, right? I don't see a breakout room on the show.
No,
Good. Okay.
you seem to be super on top of it, but we have learned that with everybody trying new systems, it's better to keep it simple tech-wise.
I totally agree. Totally agree. All right, there's Dave. I'm gonna lock the room.
Okay.
Make David a co-host. Hey, good morning, David. You're still muted.
Good morning.
All right. I love your guys' background, by the way.
Thanks.
Thanks.
That's awesome. So you guys are welcome to talk amongst yourselves. The room is locked. We do have 2 people in here, but no big deal. I'll unlock the room here as soon as you guys are ready to unlock it, and we'll just play some music till we get started. Figure we start at 9:01. Give people a chance to get in here. And who's going to go first?
We have to play a quick disclaimer from the Department of Ed,
Okay.
and then I think Jen will start.
Okay, so when you hear the music will increase in volume, and then it'll decrease. And right when it decreases to silence, that's when you start. So just
Okay.
go start your video right then, and then you guys are good to go.
All
And
right, sounds good.
I think Jen said you guys may run 55 minutes. So I'll give you guys a 15-minute warning and a 5-minute warning. You know, if I think you guys need it, I will. I think it sounds like you guys are on top of it. So, cool.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Anything you guys want to practice on or anything?
No, I'm just gonna pull up our slides and then double check that everything looks and sounds good.
Did you want to try that video? You guys, is that the video, Jen, you were talking about, the disclaimer one?
Yeah, you just want to, once you do it, roll through. Starting to look like, you know, when they fast forward in post-apocalyptic world, And everybody went from short, trendy haircuts to long. Like, it's like, that's what it's getting to be.
And when you shared,
This presentation was produced under U.
Yeah. it
Sorry,
sounds
say again?
good. When you shared, did you optimize sound? Your name?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Yep. Good. Give that a shot.
This presentation was produced under U.S. Department of Education contract number ED ESE 14D0008 with Synergy Enterprises Incorporated. The views expressed herein do not necessarily.
Yeah, that sounds really good.
Okay.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. I can open up anytime you guys want at this point. It's 10 minutes out. I think it's early, but I'm happy to open it. Play some music in the background.
Yeah, I think we're good if you want to do that. We'll probably just stay on mute and go off camera until we get to that 9 o'clock time, and then we'll come on.
Sounds good.
So close your eyes and see me go old. Feels the chase of breeze go
On project-based learning. Before we get started today, we're going to go ahead and play a quick disclaimer from the Department of Ed.
This presentation was produced under U.S. Department of Education contract number ED ESE 14D0008 with Synergy Enterprises Incorporated. The views expressed herein do not necessarily represent the positions or policies of the U.S. Department of Education. No official endorsement by the U.S. Department of Education of any product, commodity, service, methodology, technique, or enterprise mentioned here is intended or should be inferred.
Well, hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us bright and early on this lovely Tuesday morning. My name is Jen Connor. I am the lead education specialist for the Y4Y team. And so we're super excited to bring PBL to you today because I've used this for both school day when I was a teacher and an assistant principal, as well as in after school when we use a lot of project-based learning to really give the students a strong opportunity to practice all the skills they were learning during the school day and put them to use in their community. With me, we're joined by Dave McConnell.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Jen. My name's Dave McConnell. I'm the lead training specialist on the Y4Y team. I, like Jen, am excited to talk about this today, having done project-based learning quite a bit in out-of-school time programs. As we get started, feel free to just go ahead and pop a quick hello into that chat box if you'd like. We're going to be using the chat to try and interact as much as we can in this short session today. So feel free to say hello, let us know where you're joining from, and we'll go ahead and get started. So today we're talking about project-based learning, and what we mean by project-based learning is a learning approach where students gain knowledge and skills by working for a really extended period of time to investigate and respond to what we'll call an authentic, engaging, and complex question or problem, right? And there are a few key elements of really successful project-based learning projects. The first being that we're trying to facilitate a really in-depth learning experience where students are attempting to address a real-life topic, right? Something that is familiar to them, that we can, build in a lot of learning opportunities into, but that has some element of authenticity for the students, right? Another element is that we're going to give students a lot of voice and choice and kind of control, allowing them to take ownership over the project. We'll also help students learn by encouraging them to pose a lot of questions, explore a lot of different solutions for projects, and really test out kind of their thoughts and their thinking. And then we're also going to build in a lot of opportunities for students to practice and master skills that are aligned to their particular academic needs. And these elements really fit in a variety of different projects, right? Virtual, in person, across all different types of age groups. So keep those elements in mind as we get started today. Now, for you as the facilitator, why project-based learning, right? Why sit through this workshop? Why launch into a long-term project-based learning initiative with your students? Well, one of the things that we can do with students is really promote this idea of lifelong learning, right? Trying to constantly ask questions and find solutions to projects, as well as making the learning or, kind of cementing the learning with a lot of those authentic experiences like I talked about on the last slide, right? Really important. One of the other things too is that we're going to build in a lot of 21st century skills into any kind of project-based learning project. There's going to be a lot of cooperation among students, a lot of group work in most projects too. So we're constantly building a lot of critical 21st century skills that are really necessary if students are going to go into college or directly into the workforce. One of the other things too is that because we're going to be working in groups and on a variety of different types of tasks, we can really accommodate a lot of different varied learning styles among students. We can incorporate some kind of self-awareness and self-management, some of those social and emotional learning competencies as well. And then one of the other things too, and one of the nice things for us, I think, is fewer lesson plans, right? Because we're not necessarily thinking out every single activity that we're going to do with students every single day. We're working toward more of a long-term project. We can kind of, give up a little bit of that control and hopefully, make it a little bit easier to facilitate a project. Without having to write out every single detail. So we think that it's a really fantastic learning style and hopefully we'll get you all there as well. So at Y for Y or U for Youth, we talk about a three-phase approach to project-based learning. And the three phases lead us through the process of initiating kind of the planning of a project, and it leads us all the way through to a culminating event or the final product of our project. And each phase is really an essential component to completing a successful project. We're going to start with introduce and prepare, kind of all of the prep work. Phase 2, we're going to talk about defining and implementing the project, actually carrying out tasks. And then phase 3 is all about celebrating, reflecting on your work, and assessing what students have done. And a couple of tools that we have available to help walk you through this. If you've never been on the Y for Y website before, and we'll show you where that is at the end of today's session. We offer 2 resources to help you in this work. The first being our implementation planning checklist, which is a companion to our full project-based learning course on Y for Y. This helps. It basically provides you a checklist for every single step that we're going to talk about today, and that is built out in the course. We provide it in PDF and Word form, so feel free to download it, print it out if you'd like, and it'll really help you think about every single aspect of your project in really fine detail. But one of the things that we're really going to talk about today is this idea of a project-based learning wall, which is really meant to help you as a project facilitator. And what we're going to do, the idea with a project-based learning wall is that we're placing all of the information for our project on a wall, either physical wall in somewhere in our building, or if we're doing things virtually, then maybe on like a project website, or in your Google Classroom or something like that, where we'll track progress and it'll help keep you and kind of the students on task and make sure that you're monitoring, the project's completion. Now, the big thing for you as the project facilitator is that you're guiding students who are basically going to serve as kind of like the task leaders of the project, right? You want to be able to provide a little bit of coaching support, be able to just kind of steer teams and individuals kind of in the right direction, right? We don't want to do the work for the students, but we want to give them enough structure so that they make really solid decisions about the project and end up toward their final goal. And the project-based learning wall is an aid in that. And so we've gone ahead and I'll ask my colleague Jen if she's able to post a link to that blank wall in our chat. I can't seem to copy it from my slides right here today. But we've provided a blank project-based learning wall that you can follow along with. And in today's session, we're going to kind of simulate filling out one of these walls. So really good tool for managing your projects. So let's jump right in to phase one, which is introduce and prepare. And with that, we'll start with capturing student voice and choice. And we're not going to discuss this particular topic really in depth, but we would start initiating a project by reviewing and analyzing some data about our students. And there are some examples of this on the slide that you see here today. Thanks, Jen, for popping that link into the chat. I appreciate it. And so we'd start from a point of identifying what it is that students need to learn about, right? As well as what are they interested in learning about, because we really want to connect to their interests to make sure that we're creating buy-in among students. And so in our example project that we're going to walk through today, we're going to go ahead and imagine that students need some support with writing, especially the revision process, and that they're interested in current and local events, right? So that's us capturing our student voice and choice to be able to start the project off in a really solid way. And then in step two, we're going to introduce a project topic to students. So what we would do here is kind of build a sense of anticipation or excitement around the project by giving students a little bit of information at a time. And showing them what's in it for them as far as, why do I want to go ahead and do this work? And this is all about launching the project in a really efficient way that gets students really interested in working on the project. And so an example of that might be this kind of general topic that we would give to students. So what's the problem in our local community, where we would have students explore current events that affect them and their classmates in the community, the nation, or around the world. We generally have an idea that we'd like students to work as a journalist or a columnist or a news reporter to present facts, provide opinions, and come up with new ideas. And so we could introduce this topic to our students in a variety of different ways, right? I won't read all of them off, but we could have them go on a scavenger hunt through newspapers or on the internet. We could invite a guest speaker in, maybe like a local journalist or somebody who is able to hop on a video call and just kind of talk about what it is that they do with our students. We could watch a short video, or we could explore some of the tools and resources that a journalist might use just to get students kind of invested in the topic at the start and thinking about, okay, this is interesting to me. And so we've got kind of a basic idea in our heads of our project topic that we're going to walk through today. What is the problem in our local community? And so now what we need to think about is what's our actual project topic going to be? Like, what are we going to have students explore? And one of the things that we could do is take a closer look at current events. We know that students are interested in current events because of what we looked at with our student voice and choice data, which we saw a couple of slides ago. And so we've really got kind of the beginning of our project ironed out. We've got our title of the project, what is the problem, and then our topic, current events in our local community, right? And so this provides the basis for our project. And now we can get a little bit more into defining the project and really narrowing in on what students are going to work toward or accomplish And so that's steps 1 and 2. I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Jen now to talk about step 3, which is mapping knowledge and wonders. Jen?
All right. So once we've got this general idea of what our students need and what they're going to be doing, we want to give them a chance to figure out what they're interested in knowing within that topic, right? So we've started really broad with this general idea of things like zoo or current events, but really what is it that we want to pursue underneath that bigger topic? A great way to help kids figure out what they're wondering, what they're thinking, what they already know is to do a mind map. So we have a mind map here on the screen for you. And one of the things we start with is just having kids think about like, hey, what are you wondering or what do you know? So our middle school example here consists of what do you know about current events? At this point, there's no wrong answer. You just want to have kids be able to go up, write, branch things off, make connections, think about what they're doing. If they get stuck in thinking about what they know, that's a great time to ask them some guiding questions. So things like, what did you hear yesterday on the bus? Or have you heard anything on the radio recently? Do you know or have heard anyone talk about homelessness? And just sort of push them to make some connections that are already there in their brain. They may just need some prompting to do so. Once you start to write down what they know, they can then start to turn what they know or what they're curious about into some of those questions. So here's another example of a middle school wonder map. We're taking those things that they said they know about, we're sparking questions, we're thinking about things that we could research, that we could develop more knowledge about. So we're getting some things like, what causes homelessness? Is homelessness a concern in my community? How can we help the homeless? Again, there's no wrong answer at this point. We're really just pushing students to generate some basic ideas, some interest, some wondering. Even though it seems like a simple thing, asking students to actually ask questions is not a skill that we often teach students during the school day. So when you open up this broad opportunity to just sort of map what you're thinking, share what thoughts are going in, ask some questions, oftentimes our students, if it's the first time, might shut down. They might be a little overwhelmed. So something that you can do is there's something called the Right Question Institute. If you head there, it's a totally free resource. They have this awesome 10-minute activity that you can apply any time of the day, any topic you're doing. And it's just a quick routine that gives kids the practice they need to develop those skills for asking questions. When you're going to do this with the students, we also have some tools or resources for you on the Y4Y website to help. And those are called the Planner for Brainstorming and the Mapping Knowledge and Wonders tools that give you some examples and some starting points if you're unfamiliar with the process. So again, once you've selected the topic and have that general direction, we're going to use the questions and the knowledge points to help narrow down that focus in a way that takes into account what students already know, what they want to know. So let's actually hear from you. Like if we were doing a topic, or if we were doing something around current events, let's say like, what are some questions you think students might have? Like what would your students respond to these questions? Or what would they say they already know? Share that information for us in the chat box, please. What questions might your students ask about homelessness? What or people who are currently experiencing transitional housing? What might students ask about or share questions about? What do you think your students might share or ask questions, what they know, what they don't know, what they wonder? How might students respond? And go ahead and share those thoughts in the chat box. Yeah, where did they stay? Do we have people in our community that are homeless? are suffering from homelessness, are in need of housing, which is great. And especially now, I know when I was growing up or Dave was growing up, media, social media hadn't come into the world yet, right? We were also just playing Oregon Trail, seeing if we could stay alive. But now students have access to more and they hear more of that information. And so it's great because they probably will come with a lot more questions to the table or more knowledge. So things like, are there kids who are homeless? How do they stay warm? Will they separate siblings? Those are all great questions. And so those are the things that we want to guide students to, and not answer them, but just say like, these are interesting, these are great. Such amazing wondering. Something I always did with my middle school kids was pointed out that people who are smart are people who have a lot of questions, not necessarily a lot of answers. And they loved that, getting this understanding of the world of like, if I can just ask questions and research them, then I'm a smart person. And for them, it was great that they could frame this idea of intelligence around asking questions and a skill that they could learn. So then once we do that, then we can say, okay, we have all these great questions. Which one as a team or a group do we really want to explore and engage with? And this is where we choose our inquiry direction. So we post up all the pictures and then we come up with a way to help students choose the direction they want to head in, or our inquiry direction. When they're doing that, sometimes we would put them up and they would vote. And we would just say, okay, go ahead and put a tally next to the one you'd love to explore. We would do this openly sometimes, or we would rank the questions and then have and then see where our rankings came about. Or we would just put the boxes up and do anonymous voting. So kids could just put in like a token or a slip of paper to do their vote. But the goal here is we're helping students go from this big picture concept of what this topic is, and then start to think about all the things they wonder or they know. And then out of all of that say, okay, these are great, but what's the one question we're gonna seek an answer to? And we use that to then pick our inquiry direction and help us frame the rest of the work. Now, once we've picked our inquiry direction and we know the question we're gonna answer, then we want to think about how we could tie that particular question to the real life. So here's where we say, okay, in real life, what type of job would answer that question or would know the answer because they work to solve or work with under that question in an ongoing matter? So you want to help kids see if they can develop or identify the job that they're doing, but at the same time, if it's something that is well outside of their range of knowledge, right? So I was thinking sometimes we did once where I worked mostly in urban environments. So one of the questions that came up is like, where does our food come from? Like, how does it even get to the grocery store? And for them, they had such little life experience or knowledge of farms or farming system to ask the students, hey, what jobs does somebody do on a farm? They all looked at me like, farmer? And then that was like all they had. So if the students are knowledgeable about an area, then open it up to them and let them identify the jobs. If you know that it's an area where they don't have a lot of knowledge, you can either give them options and let them explore those options, or you can give them some resources to identify the jobs and then pick the ones that best match. When they're doing the project-based learning, it's great that students see that the work that they're doing is actually mimicking the work that a person would do as a job in real life, because they get this strong idea and ability to see their connection between what they're learning during the day in the program to things that can help them in real life. And so for a great example of this is I just got my first LinkedIn request from one of my former students, which I feel like is a little bit of a holy grail moment for teachers. But she is a communications major, and she said one of the reasons she became a communications major is because she realized when we were doing project-based learning, she loved making infographics and talking to people and doing presentations. And so that practice opportunity gave her insight into what a job would be like in the real world. And it made her choices in college a lot stronger because she had some reference or background. Now, at this point, once our students have done the what I wonder, they have that like real world connection, we want to make sure that we're adding that to our wall. One of the reasons why we give you the paper wall and that handout is because not all after school programs have a space that they call their own and where they can post this up and keep it going. If you are a place that has a consistent room, you're not sharing it with a teacher, it's just the after school space, you can put the wall up and just leave it and have it be an active wall where students are putting things up, taking things down. If you're not, you can use these walls or the paper wall to represent that. And students can have that active experience. They're just going to have it on the paper, not on the actual wall. Now, in all of this work, one thing that's great about PBL is it really gets students to think about how questions sort of dictate and determine the answers you get or the research you do or the process you have. So that's one of the reasons why you'll see multiple questions, because we want to keep refining the question to make sure the words we're using, the way that we're phrasing the question are leading us to get exactly the answer we want. So the next step in this question process is to push to a driving question. A driving question is what is going to decide and guide all the learning for the remainder of the project, because everything we do has to lead us closer to an ability to answer this question and demonstrate the knowledge that we've gained. Once students learn this too, it's a great thing to point out to them that they are going to be expected to do this in high school, in college, in their job, is coming up with these strong questions that sort of dictate the parameters of work, especially when they get to the writing or the research. So what's a driving question? There's a couple of qualities of good, strong driving questions. And we do have a chart for you on the Y4Y website that outlines each of these. But essentially, a driving question is just one where kids cannot say, yep, no, right? They have to be able to answer. They have to be able to do something that puts them into these broader questions. Sometimes we refer to them as open-ended questions versus closed questions, but the real whole point is this is just pushing kids to have to come up with an answer that they had to really research and think about in order to get there. The qualities of a driving question are great when you're working with students to sort of say like, okay, is it open-ended? How is it connected to the real world? Is it going to challenge you? Are you going to actually have to do things in order to answer this question? Now, once you go to actually formalize and write out your driving question, there is a system or a process that you can do. So let's practice that with our middle school example. So our original thought that the students had selected, or their inquiry direction, are how many homeless adults and children are there in my community? It is an interesting question, but honestly, many of my students would have gone to their Chrome devices, or if they had their cell phone and they would have said, hey, Google, how many? And they would have asked that question, which is what I even see my 7-year-old doing now. And so this isn't a strong driving question because you could go to one source, you could open it up, get the answer, say, this is where I got it from, and move along. So we want to follow sort of a pattern that pushes us to create that great quality driving question. And so that pattern looks like having a question phrase, a role, an action verb, a topic, and a target audience. Now, if you're experienced with project-based learning, you don't need to Kelly, I know my Google did the same thing, actually. It's a little spooky how often it just responds every time you say Google. But you don't have to follow this exact same structure in a question. If you are new or your students are new to PBL, then this is a great framework to get practice opportunities in writing. If we were then to modify our existing question, right, we will want to do so in a way that fits in these areas. So has a question phrase, a role, an action verb, a topic, and a target audience. So we'd love to hear from you. If you were going to rewrite this, our before question, and make it a strong driving question, what would that look like? So following that structure on the screen, go ahead and rewrite our inquiry direction question and share with us in the chat box. We can see some of your ideas. And I believe you will have access to this particular PowerPoint through the conference setup itself. However, we will also give you a link to our Y4Y website where you can go on and grab all the tools we talk about, have access to our course, our self-paced online course. So either you or anyone in your staff could complete and get a lot of this information. And then we also do have some PowerPoints that help if you are responsible for training staff that you can download and use to help train staff on PBL as well. And so now again, we're just thinking and going to share with us some possible questions. Can you believe there are homeless adults and children in your community? So that's definitely a lot closer. One of the things I would recommend adding in their list is like a role. So like what could students do to explore that question? Who might be a person that would know or answer that question? And then as you consider thinking about how you might revise that, I'm going to go ahead and share with you the structure so you get a sense of what that might look like. So in the first one, it's how can we, right? That's our question phrase. Other question phrases that you might be able to choose from are what can we, how could we, what could we, how should we, what should we? Just do a lot of shoulds and coulds and woulds. And then you get yourself a strong question phrase. Then you can move on to your real life role. So like, how could we, as a social worker, right? So we would think about if we're looking at ways to support individuals who are currently suffering from homelessness or who are experiencing transitional housing concerns, we would think about what's that role that would answer that or perform that job, and it might be a social worker. So then how can we help our community members to support those who are homeless? So our next action verb is that support and help. So if you are doing any work on lesson plans, you're familiar with things like Bloom's taxonomy. It's that idea of picking a verb that then you have to do something to match that verb to show. And then our community members, that's our target audience. So by the end of this project, we want to know that if I was a social worker and I was going to galvanize or get the group, my community together to support people who are suffering from homelessness, what would I do or what could I do? And then that takes us to adding our driving question. So we want to again go back to our wall and add that as our driving question. So we have it all right there in front of us. And then essentially we have gone ahead and filled up that orange side, that first phase, which leads us to the second phase. And I'm going to turn that back over to Dave so he can walk you into the first phase.
Yep, thanks, Jen, and thanks to everybody for participating in the chat. We really appreciate you throwing out your responses to our questions. So we've thought through kind of some of the initial planning of the project, right? Phase one, like we talked about, is all about narrowing down to a really specific project so that students know what they're working towards, right? Now, in phase two, we're ready to talk about implementing and getting students actually working on the project. Really important that at this point in the project, you're really just facilitating the learning, as we talked about before, right? Letting students use their skills, ask questions, get really hands-on with you kind of guiding them through the process. The overall goal of this phase of the PBL kind of framework is to guide students through every step of the actual project itself, right? And the idea is that by the end of phase two, when we get through facilitating the plan, students should have answered that driving question. So how can we as social workers help our community members who are homeless? Ideally, once we get through this phase, they would have answered that question. And so now we just continue to define the project in step 7. So at this point in the project, students are going to decide how are we actually going to answer that driving question and how are we going to demonstrate that answer. And there's a lot of different stuff that students could do to get to that point. We could go back to mapping, having students brainstorm ideas as part of a group, which would be really good. We could focus on the audience. So you could ask students to think about who would be interested in your answer, okay? Who would be interested to learn more about whatever your findings are and how you answer that driving question. Could that be their peers in school? Could it be teachers or administrators at their school? Could it be community members or some kind of like partner who's out in the community? We could have students search the internet or focus on what people in the field do. So we could have students think through the process of what does a social worker do on a daily basis, right? And then that's kind of, in exploring that work, they would figure out how to answer that driving question or the process for coming to the answer of that driving question. And we could also connect to some existing knowledge. So what have students done previously? Was there like some kind of school assembly that they may have attended recently that would give them kind of a jumping off point for their project? Maybe they've learned about some similar work that somebody in another school or program has done, right? So we want to think about all of the different ways that we can get students to further define and narrow down that project idea to try and answer that driving question. But when we're doing all of that work to narrow the focus, one of the things that we as the facilitators need to think about and push students to think about is whether or not the project is of really high quality. And so there are some what we'll call the 6 A's of quality that we can kind of use to measure the project. So is the project authentic, right? Are students really using their knowledge effectively to focus on like a real world project or problem in their community, right? Is it academically rigorous? So is it actually challenging and connecting to students' academic needs? We talked a little bit earlier on about how in our example, students needed help with the writing process and specifically revision. So is the project and what they're going to do to answer our driving question connected back to that student need? And if not, then we need to think about how we can steer the project in a way that's going to get students writing to that point. Are we promoting adult relationships? So are we having students connect to adult mentors or exposing them to adults who have expertise that's relevant to the project activities? Is there active exploration? So are we connecting students to the real world? And then assessment, or I skipped applied learning. Is the project calling for students to develop really good habits for like thinking through like time management skills, organizational skills? Are students, asking really solid questions in the project? And then finally, assessment. is there a built-in assessment, or are there points of assessment in the project so we can know whether the project is on the right track and how well students are doing at the end of the project, right? We want to be able to evaluate student work, even if we are, in the out of school time space, right? So we can think about these 6 A's of quality as we steer and facilitate the project. And so here's our driving question. We put it up on the screen. And in the project, we as social workers are going to help our community to support those who are homeless. And so an example of a project idea that we could do is to have students create a back to school bash where students would design an event that includes collecting school supply donations, backpacks, opportunities for things like free haircuts, and what we'll call a school clothes closet, where families could bring their children to get everything they need to start school, right? So we are in this project idea directly addressing the issue of homelessness in our community, specifically our school community, right? But does it measure up against the 6 A's of quality? I would think that it comes pretty close, right? Is the project authentic? It is absolutely addressing a problem that would have meaning to students. Are students actively exploring and doing kind of real investigations into the issue? They definitely are. We would have to think about how are we going to assess student work over the course of this project. But I would think that it would come pretty close to measuring up against those 6 A's of quality in this example idea. And once we've thought about whether or not the project idea meets those 6 A's of quality, we need to start thinking about what is our final product or event going to be. And this is one of the kind of the last things that you'll do as part of the project, is actually facilitating like a presentation or an event. But we need to start thinking about that now so that students know what it is that they're working towards. And it's really important for you because as the project facilitator, you're there to ensure that all of the logistical details are being figured out for, along the way, right? So when students are brainstorming tasks and developing their timeline, you need to make sure that the timeline's realistic and that it lines up with whatever that culminating event is. So if, for example, students are going to be in that back to school bash doing some kind of presentation to school, the people in the school, then are they going to have enough time to be able to put together a good presentation? And then logistically, are we booking the space for it? Are we connecting with the school day to make sure that we can, put together that event? So we need to think through all of those tips, like setting that date, reserving the space, and inviting an interested audience. We need to start thinking about that now in the process to make sure that we can actually make it happen. And so on our wall, we would need to think about our project description and list an idea for kind of like a final product, which we've already done in our example. So we've got our back to school bash, our audience is school members, and then we've got some roles and assignments that we can start to think about with students. So having students work as like a project manager, a researcher, a social worker for sure. We'd probably need a writer and so on. So we're continuing to fill out that wall with all of the information that we'll have for students, right? So as we narrow the focus, we're able to add more information for students, and then we'll get to that timeline piece soon. And then finally, we would get to that culminating event, right? And what's the idea for a potential culminating event? So I'd like to ask you now in the chat. We have this idea of a back to school bash, if you will, where we're essentially going to collect like school supplies, so things like notebooks, pencils, clothes for students and community members. So they have access to some of those materials before school starts the following year. So what are some additional things that we could do for a culminating event for this particular project? I'm interested in some of your ideas. And we got a question about, Jen, what are some ideas that we suggest for sharing the projects and the culminating event in the time of COVID? I think that certainly one of the things that we could do is organize some sort of virtual event. We're going to do a presentation, then we could fairly easily, shift that from an in-person event to some kind of like thing over Zoom, right? One of the other things, though, that could be interesting, and we'd want to work with our students on this, of course, but you could explore something like putting together like a website, or something really simple, or doing like a presentation board, online instead of doing it as like an in-person event. Jen, do you have any ideas?
Yeah, so some things that we've seen people do are virtual museums. And so those could either be like live events where you have a student log on and it's a different gallery in each room. So if you use something like a Zoom breakout, each student gets their own breakout room. We've seen students do things where they created their own virtual environment and then it was like a video. Or we've seen students do things like create infographics, create more visual media. So maybe they create a something that would go on like Instagram, like an Instagram story. And so whereas normally we might pull in one or two of those more virtual options to create variety, now in the time of COVID, we would just want to rely on those a little bit more heavily because they could be done in a sort of safe way, and then showcase all the great work that the students are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jen. And so we've thought about kind of the rest of our wall and our our project idea. We've been able to fill out some project tasks, put in our roles and assignments. And so here's what our culminating event could look like if we were in person, right? We would have some time set aside to set up the day before the event, but then we would have an agenda with, starting at 8 a.m., the students and volunteers arrive and then the doors open and we do, kind of like a final event presentation at 4 o'clock and then clean up at 5. And so this is an example of something that we could do for that culminating event. And we've thought about it far enough in advance that we can get all of these different elements sorted out. So now I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Jen to talk about how we document and assess the learning.
There you go. One thing I wanted to point out is that we talk about the culminating event towards the end when we do the presentation, because we present it in order of how it would occur in working with students. And that sort of helps create the frame as we're walking through. The reality is that when you are doing this with students, you want to have in mind what the culminating event is, like right around the time that you pick your driving question. You also want to kind of pick that out. So one, that the work product that you're creating matches the culminating event, so students can actually publicize it and present it. It also means that you give yourself an opportunity to plan and put it together. Sometimes culminating events are something that is a little like on the simpler side, so where maybe you have students create and write a children's book. So then they're just going to younger students and reading that children's book and getting feedback. That's authentic audience, that's presenting their work, which is great. Other times, you may want to do more. And so, for instance, we had our students build the homes of the future, and they built an actual model of that home that was relatively tall. They had to build it so that I think like a kindergartner could walk in. And in that case, because we were near a local university, we had architecture students come in and critique the experience and the building. Because we actually did both of those, one took a lot more time and planning to get set up, and others we just needed to like walk across the street to the elementary school and have it happen. So just something to keep in mind while you're thinking about it. Once students are completely done, you want to make sure that you're taking time to gather all of the work that they've done, have a big collection so that you can reflect and assess on the learning that happened. Again, this is also kind of a decision you want to make along with the culminating event at the driving question. So you can do that through having a rubric, setting yourself up to maybe know what you're going to collect. You can have students put a portfolio together. You can have students do that virtually or in person. You can do checklists. Just how are you going to monitor the process? How are you going to monitor the learning that's happening? Once you've collected all that information and you have it engaged and you have it set together, then you want to step back with your staff and your students to reflect and assess on the learning that actually happened. So we have some ideas that you could do there through reflecting on the journals, monitoring those, surveys, rubrics, portfolios. But the idea is really, one, have the students have a step back and sort of give them that moment to reflect. Where was I when I started this process? What have I learned and what can I do now in order to complete or and to show? Did I answer my question? Did I have fun while I was doing it? Do I feel more capable and competent? For staff, it's having them reflect back on what choices and decisions did they make that really helped strengthen the learning experience, that made the project stronger, and where could they improve decisions that they made or changes to the process. When I first started project-based learning, I realized there was so much that I didn't know that I needed to sort of control the process a little bit more so that I had the ability to think through myself what students needed, what did they have, where did they have access to, what could I get, and make sure that things that came up I could get quickly. Other times we've seen, I was able to pull back and let the kids make more decisions. If you are in an area where if kids have a question, you can go to the library, internet's easy, you can snag and grab and just put things in there. Oh, sure, I can go to the dollar store tonight and then you can build this stuff tomorrow. Great, that's awesome. But we've also been in places where it's a 2-hour drive to any store, 3 hours, 4 hours. And so you might not be able to physically let kids think of what they want to build today, drive to the store that night, and then have them build it the next day. So you want to make sure that you're just also considering all those pieces. Again, the culminating event, the documenting, the reflecting, we talk about it at the end because it happens at the end, but think about that a little bit towards the beginning. Then you're going to go ahead and once you make those decisions about reflect and assess, you're just going to pop, and the culminating event, you're going to pop that into the board so that you can just keep track of how that's happening. If we were going to go ahead and continue to build our PBL wall, we might add something like students are going to collect all their work in a portfolio. I'm going to develop a rubric to apply to that portfolio. And then in order to help students make sure they reflect, I'm going to have them each week go on a vlog, so do a video blog. Another great tool is if you get those recorders. They're pretty cheap on Amazon now, and have students just record their thoughts. Then they can listen back to it or watch back to it later on in order to see what they were thinking at the time and how it's changed now. We're just going to throw all those decisions onto our PBL wall so that individuals can really, or so everybody can see what's happening, what are we doing, where are we going. And then with that sort of brings us to the wrap up of all of our work, right? So we did phase 1 and then phase 2 of making those decisions. And then we went into phase 3, doing that culminating event, documenting the learning, reflecting and assessing. This was a 50-minute session today, and so it's fairly short time to go through. So what we wanted to do was just provide you with a strong overview of the steps that you would be able to implement and work on doing the PBL, so you have a frame of reference. What we really encourage after this is to think about what did you already know or were familiar with. Be like, cool, got it. Think about the areas that you are unfamiliar with and that you need more support or some more research, and go ahead and jump onto the Y for Y website. So Dave's going to go ahead and post that website so it's easy for you to snag in the chat box. He's just posted on the screen. Oh, and it's also on the screen as well. So it's y4y.ed.gov. Dave just put it in there. And it's project-based learning. So what Dave showed you are the courses. And Valerie, yeah, so it's a little bit tricky sometimes. I'm going to go ahead and give you my email address in the chat box real quick. So if at any point in time, anyone has any questions or any issues of not being able to find something, please go ahead and send me an email and I can send you the direct link. Essentially, when you go on, just go to the top. If you want to take a course, if you want to learn more about the topic, go to that Learn tab at the top, pick courses, and then you can, and it'll show you all the options. If there's a specific tool that you want or a resource that you want, there's the button at the top that says Tools. Click that. It gives you all the tools. And then at the very end, next to that is also resources. And the Learn More library, and that's where you can find a lot of our external resources that we've vetted for you. If you would like more information around Y4Y, feel free to send us a text message, text 22828, and then just put in that text Y4Y Insider. That'll prompt you to get you set up for a mailing list. But you are also welcome, if you just go to our website and sign up, you can get on our mailing list that way. We'll get you access to not just the Y4Y website, but on our mailing list only once a month. It just lets you know what trainings are coming up, what new resources or courses we've put out there. Promise we don't bombard you. It's just once a month. And here is again the website. Please make sure you go ahead over and check out the website. There's a ton of resources. It's all free. You can download it and use it as is. You can download it in its native document form and make changes. Can't get better than high quality and free. If you have any general questions about Y4Y, that is the Y4Y TA email. But I also popped my, my email address into the box. Feel free to reach out directly. And with that, I think we're just at questions, Dave, while we get ready to wrap up and transition to the next session.
Yeah, Jen, I think the room's just about to close in a few seconds. I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to hang out with us this morning. I hope everybody continues to have a good rest of the virtual conference. Feel free to reach out to us with any questions. For those who asked about the PowerPoint and the recording, we'll follow up with the conference organizers to see how that information is going to be sent out to you all. But in the meantime, feel free to send us an email at y4yta@seiservices.com, and we'll try and get you the materials that you need. So thanks, everybody, and have a great day.
Okay. I know the conference is also providing a feedback link, but if you have a moment, we'd love for you to just click on that hyperlink we put in the chat box. That is our personal Y4Y feedback. So we'd love to hear exactly what you have to say, your thoughts, suggestions. We always look at those in order to make sure that we're providing training that is useful and stuff that you guys want.
Out your window on a winter's morning, your breath is steam and there's frost falling in the sun. Cast a spell upon the road. Nothing of beauty is